Let's be honest. How many times have you sat in silence, staring at your phone, wondering if their quiet meant peace, or if it was a storm brewing beneath the surface? Have you ever felt someone vanish from your life without a proper goodbye, yet somehow their energy still lingers? It's one of the most misleading concepts out there. If they're not calling, if they're not texting, if they're not showing up, they must be over it. Right? That's the story society sells you. But here's the twist. It's a lie dressed as logic. And it's time we rip that mask off. The truth is far more subtle, far more psychological. Emotional attachment doesn't always look like longing. It's not always tear-stained messages or late-night calls. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it masks itself as silence, indifference, cold distance, and yet it still breathes, waiting to be seen. Most people misread these signals and fall into emotional traps, giving their power away to ghosts. But what if I told you there's a stoic way to reclaim that power? That what you're feeling isn't paranoia, it's perception. What if the stillness around you was actually filled with hidden signs? This video, this moment, this shift, you're about to unlock something potent. We're not talking about generic advice. We're diving into emotional intelligence at its sharpest edge. You'll uncover how people who swear they've moved on leave emotional fingerprints everywhere, if you know where to look. Not because they want you back, but because they're still stuck where you've already evolved from. And that's where your clarity begins. You'll start to notice the patterns, the energy shifts, the passive signals, the digital footprints. And here's the key. We're going to approach this from the lens of stoicism, not emotional chaos. This isn't about chasing closure. It's about observing behavior without becoming its prisoner. This is about rising without reacting, noticing without needing. If you've been craving answers without surrendering your self-respect, you're in the right place. So, I want you to stay with me, because what comes next, each point we unpack, is not only going to change how you see them, it's going to change how you lead yourself. And that's what Stoic relationships are all about. Not detaching to punish, but detaching to protect your peace. Not ignoring for power, but ignoring for purpose. At the end of this, you won't just feel clearer, you'll feel stronger, sharper, freer. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens in number 6. Because that final shift, it'll show you exactly why they're still watching and why you no longer need to watch back. 1. Their emotions still react to you. You can always sense it, not from their words, but from the energy shift when your name enters a room, even in your absence. The truth is, emotions don't lie. Reactions do. You see, when someone is truly indifferent, their soul stays still. You could be brought up in casual conversation. Someone could scroll past a photo of you, and they'd blink no differently than they would at a traffic light. That's what emotional detachment really looks like. Clean, neutral, and unbothered. But when someone flinches, freezes, gets passive-aggressive, or tries too hard to act unfazed when you're mentioned, that's not neutrality. That's the residue of attachment. That's a soul wrestling with unfinished business. If they really didn't care, they wouldn't try so hard to prove it. And yet, we've all been conditioned to believe that loud indifference means strength. But here's the Stoic reality. When someone still reacts, even subtly, emotionally, energetically, they're not done feeling. They might hate to admit it, even to themselves, but your name still carries weight. You can watch their face stiffen when your mutual friend brings you up, hear their tone flatten, watch their energy drop as if a ghost just walked into the room. That's not peace, that's a pulse. And here's where Stoicism gives you your edge. Instead of being swept into their emotional weather system, you observe the storm. You don't chase it, you don't run from it, you don't try to control the clouds, you just watch. And in that watching, in that grounded stillness, you reclaim your center, because you can learn a lot from how someone reacts when you're no longer chasing them. Their silence is information, their energy is data, And when they overreact, mock, or try to downplay who you were in their life, it's because your absence is louder than they expected. This isn't about arrogance. This is about awareness, because when you're still a trigger, you're still a factor. When they mention your name with just a little too much effort to sound disinterested, when their body tenses or their voice raises an octave too high, they're not over it. They're in conflict. That conflict doesn't always stem from love. It often comes from ego. You were the person who didn't break when they thought you would, the one who walked away without burning the bridge, but didn't return either. That kind of composure, your Stoic Relationships approach, rattles people who depend on drama to feel relevance. And that's why they react. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you did everything right. You stopped performing. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped justifying your worth. And now their emotional radar still picks up your signal, even though you've gone quiet. Imagine a lake, still, beautiful, seemingly untouched, but toss a stone into it, and the ripples expose what lies beneath. That's what happens when someone hears your name. You throw a silent ripple, and suddenly their calm can't hide the storm anymore. And if you're paying close attention, you'll notice the mask crack. A quick breath held, a dry joke forced, a subject changed just a little too fast. This is why your presence is still potent. It reveals what they haven't healed. People forget that emotional attachment isn't always tender. Sometimes it shows up as resentment, defensiveness, even mockery. But if you truly didn't matter, you wouldn't matter enough to mock. That's the paradox they can't escape, and this is where most people get pulled back in. You see that flicker, that shift in tone, and suddenly the heart whispers, maybe they still care. Maybe there's something to fix, but caring isn't always an invitation. Reaction doesn't always mean readiness. And just because you still stir their emotions doesn't mean they're capable of meeting you with clarity, consistency, or commitment. This is where Stoicism saves you from the trap. You don't chase validation in their reactions. You don't seek your worth in their emotional spasms. You recognize that their conflict isn't your cue. Their unresolved feelings are not your responsibility. And just because their ego is bruised doesn't mean you owe them healing. Ask yourself, if someone still tenses at your presence, is that about you, or is that about their unprocessed story of you? Let that sink in. Because a stoic soul doesn't beg for closure, they create it internally. A person rooted in self-awareness doesn't need another person's reaction to feel real. You already are. And while they might still be battling ghosts, you're walking forward. They might still be reacting to the chapter you've already finished. That's the cost of evolution. They remember you as you were, not who you've become. And that version of you, she's not emotionally available to validate their immaturity. You don't exist to comfort the ego of someone who once underestimated your power. And that's why your name still rattles them. Not because they want you back, but because they can't forget how you left, with grace, with stillness, with no announcement. Your growth doesn't scream, it hums. And that hum, it's unsettling for anyone still living in noise. So when they flinch, when they lash out, when they try to overcompensate, stay grounded. That's not your moment to lean in. That's your signal to lean back, to breathe, to return to your Stoic Relationships code. Because emotional control isn't about repressing what you feel. It's about not letting it own your behavior. You don't mirror chaos. You become the calm they never expected. That's what real power looks like. And here's something you must remember. If they were truly over you, they wouldn't flinch. They wouldn't suddenly post quotes about betrayal. They wouldn't tense when you're brought up, or get defensive if someone says you've been thriving. Detachment isn't reactive, it's quiet, and that's how you know they're not detached. They're disturbed by your peace, by your power, by the fact that you didn't crumble. And every time your name makes them shift, your growth echoes louder than any comeback could. Don't get drawn back into emotional games just because someone hasn't done their inner work. You've done yours. You've chosen clarity over chaos, and you know what? You don't need to win an argument that no longer matters. You don't need to shrink to make them feel comfortable. If they can't handle your silence, they were never built for your presence. Let them wrestle with the memory of you. Let them flinch. Let them pretend. But you lead with calm. You walk like someone who no longer trades their peace for proof. You love yourself too much to need their confusion as evidence. And that, my friend, is exactly why they still react. Because their story ended, but yours kept going. That's not heartbreak. That's emotional accountability. That's the ripple effect of Stoic relationships done right. 2, they keep tabs on you in silence. They're gone, right? No calls, no texts, no casual, "How have you been?" The silence is complete. At least that's what it looks like on the surface. But here's what no one talks about. Emotional attachment doesn't always show up as presence. Sometimes it shows up in the shadows, behind the screens, through the silence. You don't hear from them, but somehow they're still watching. You post a story and they view it within minutes. You upload a photo, and 6 weeks later they've scrolled back and liked it out of nowhere. Or maybe it's more subtle. Maybe they don't interact, but you see their name in your viewer list, quietly lurking like a ghost who never really left. That's not coincidence. That's emotional orbit. That's not detachment. That's attention dressed in disguise. And let's be real, people don't accidentally end up watching your stories at 2 a.m. unless they're still emotionally invested. You're not part of their life, but you're still part of their feed. And they're scrolling not because they're healed, but because you still live in their headspace. This is where Stoic relationships call for deep observation, not reaction, observation. You don't screenshot their name in your story views. You don't overanalyze the timing of their digital appearances. You just notice, because when someone has truly moved on, they move out, they unfollow, they disengage. They delete the thread and don't reopen the app hoping to see your highlight reel. But if they're still silently orbiting, it's because they haven't let go. Maybe they're too proud to reach out. Maybe they're too ashamed to admit they miss you. Maybe they don't even consciously realize they're doing it. But here's what Stoicism teaches you. What they're doing isn't nearly as important as what you're doing with that information. Are you using their quiet attention to feed your ego? Or are you using it as evidence of your evolution? Because when you can see someone watching without needing them to speak, that's clarity, that's control, that's emotional maturity. They might say nothing, but their digital footsteps tell the truth. Think about it. If they didn't care, why are they still here? Why do they still orbit your world, even if just online? Why are they keeping tabs on your life while saying they've let go? It's because emotional detachment is a myth they sold themselves, but the evidence keeps proving otherwise. They're curious, they're conflicted, they're afraid, because you moved forward and they're still stuck in the reruns of what used to be. You're out here building, growing, living, and they're in the back row of your theater, watching, without a ticket. That's not strength, that's limbo. And you know what's wild? Most people think they're hiding it well. They think their silence protects them from being seen. But a trained Stoic mind sees through all of it. It notices the timing. It notices the alignment. That random, like right after you post something powerful, that wasn't random. That quote they reposted that oddly matches your latest caption, that wasn't coincidence. These are not passive actions. These are quiet check-ins. They want to know if you're still accessible, if your energy still bends toward theirs, if the thread is still alive. But you're not the same person anymore. You're no longer available for invisible relationships. You're no longer performing for invisible audiences. And that, in itself, is unsettling for them. Because they were used to the version of you that sought validation, that cared if they watched, that waited for their attention. But now, you're rooted, grounded, clear. You don't play hide and seek with people who ghosted your growth. You see them watching, and instead of responding, you keep rising. And here's where the trap is for most people. They see that digital breadcrumb, and they bite. they respond, they post back, they like something in return, and suddenly you're caught in a loop again, feeding an emotional connection that doesn't even have words. But not you, not anymore. You've chosen to live like a stoic, detached from the need to be seen, immune to the emotional bait of someone who couldn't walk beside you but won't walk away either. Their curiosity is not your cue. Their observation is not an invitation. They left the path and you didn't pause. That's what stings. That's why they watch. Because they thought you'd crumble. They expected you to stall. But instead, you kept building. And now they're stuck in a strange place, too proud to come back, too curious to fully leave. That's emotional purgatory. And that's not your problem. You're no longer here for half efforts, for passive pings and accidental texts. You're not a mystery to be solved or a door to be tested. You're a whole, walking, breathing boundary. And Stoicism reminds you daily, just because they're still watching doesn't mean they're worthy of your attention. Just because they're curious doesn't mean they're capable. Let them watch, let them scroll, let them wonder. Your progress is not a performance. Your peace is not a test. If they want access, they'll show up in truth, not breadcrumbs. If they care, they'll be clear. But until then, your job is not to analyze their signals. Your job is to protect your own frequency, because the version of you they're watching now, she's not available for digital ghosts. She's too focused on becoming. And here's the part they don't see. Every time they watch, silently, hoping for a reaction, what they're really watching is their own regret unfolding. Not because you're taunting them, but because you've become untouchable. Not in a prideful way, but in a peaceful one. And peace, true peace, is the scariest thing for someone who hasn't found it yet. Because it makes them realize what they lost, what they walked away from, what they thought they could replace but couldn't replicate. You were the standard, the calm in their chaos, the one who held space without demanding a show. And that kind of presence doesn't vanish. It lingers, it echoes, it haunts. So they lurk, they peek, they watch, but they never truly return. And don't you dare shrink for that. Don't you dare wait. Because you were never meant to be an emotional side quest. You were the real thing, and now you're the evolution they no longer have access to. That's why Stoic relationships matter, because they teach you that not every connection deserves revival. Some deserve closure, not with words, but with distance. Some people don't need to hear from you again. They need to feel what it's like to lose access to the healthiest version of you. That's not punishment, that's protection, that's peace. So the next time you see them watching your story or liking a 6-month-old post, smile. Not because it validates you, but because it confirms what you already know. You moved forward and they stayed back. That's not your weight to carry, that's their mirror to face. You don't owe anyone an emotional encore just because they stuck around to watch the credits. You're not a highlight reel. You're not nostalgia. You're not a what if to scroll through when they're lonely. You're a full story, unfolding with or without their applause. So hold your ground, stay stoic, stay still. Let them watch, let them wonder. Let them feel the absence they created, because your job now is not to entertain curiosity, it's to protect your clarity. And if you've ever felt tempted to reach back, to respond to the watcher in the shadows, ask yourself, is this connection building my future or dragging me back into confusion? Because the Stoic answer is always peace. And peace never has to prove itself. Now, if you're nodding your head right now, if this part of the journey hits home, then I want you to do one thing. Like this video and comment number 1 below. If you've ever spotted someone watching you from a distance, too afraid to speak, but too attached to let go. And if you're finding clarity, if this message is giving you power, hit that subscribe button so you never forget the strength of stillness and the fire of walking forward without flinching. Let's keep growing, let's keep building, and let them keep watching. 3, they try to trigger a reaction. They won't say it outright. They won't message you and admit, I miss you, or confess, I still think about you. No, that would require honesty. That would require vulnerability. And for someone still locked in ego, in pride, in fear, vulnerability feels like surrender. So instead of walking through the front door of communication, they sneak around to the side window of emotional games. They post the photo they know you'll see. They share the song you used to play together. They upload a vague quote at midnight that cuts a little too close to your last conversation. It's not coincidence, it's calculation. Not because they're malicious, but because they're unhealed. And here's what you have to understand. People don't try to trigger a reaction from what they've outgrown. You don't poke at what you've buried. You don't test a connection that's no longer alive. You only do that when a piece of you still needs to know it mattered, that you mattered, that somewhere out there you're still watching, still caring, still bleeding a little when they move a little. That's not detachment, that's performance. But you don't play that game anymore because stoicism is your compass now. You've learned that not all noise is communication. Some of it is bait, and bait only works on the emotionally hungry. When someone's trying to trigger you, they're not looking for love. They're looking for control. They want to know they can still shift your mood, shift your behavior, shift your peace. And every time you react, whether it's a like, a story repost, a cryptic message back, they win. Not because they got you back, but because they pulled you back into a loop of almosts, a loop of what ifs, a loop of maybe they still care. But Stoic relationships aren't built on loops. They're built on clarity. And clarity says if they wanted to speak, they would. If they wanted to return, they'd knock on the door, not throw pebbles at your window hoping for a glance. So what do you do when they test your waters? When they suddenly post a photo with someone new, but the caption's a quote only you would understand? When they show up in your feed looking different, more polished, more performative, looking perhaps like they want to be seen by you, you don't react. You don't engage. You don't bite the emotional hook, because reacting to provocation isn't connection. It's emotional surrender. It's telling them you're still reachable through triggers, but you've grown, you've evolved, you've become a mountain, and mountains don't move just because the weather changes. You stay rooted, you stay calm, you stay centered. Because when you understand someone is trying to spark a reaction instead of having a conversation, you realize they're still caught in the story. A story they didn't finish, a chapter they regret, and they don't know how to say it. So, they act it out instead. It's a kind of emotional theater where they hope the performance will speak the words they can't. But here's where stoicism becomes your shield. You've trained yourself to recognize the difference between a real invitation and a false flag, between authenticity and attention-seeking. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That quote they posted, it wasn't random. That post with the mysterious "finally free" caption, it wasn't about their journey, it was about you. They want you to notice. They want you to flinch. But you don't flinch anymore, because you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed to be triggered to feel important. You've stopped searching for signs in silence. Now you search for peace, and peace doesn't scream, it doesn't provoke, it doesn't push, it just is. And so are you. And the irony? Your stillness, your lack of response, your refusal to chase, that triggers them. They throw the bait. You don't bite. They post the photo. You don't react. They flaunt the rebound. You don't blink. And suddenly, they're not in control. You are. And that power, it's not in manipulation. It's in mastery, emotional mastery, because you don't dance with shadows anymore. You don't trade your stability for a shot of nostalgia. You've stopped gambling your progress for the high of being remembered. And when they realize they can no longer touch you, not with quotes, not with photos, not even with jealousy, that's when the real breakdown happens, because people expect you to waver, to slip, to respond. But you're grounded now, and Stoic relationships have taught you one truth over and over again. If they can't say it with their chest, they don't deserve your ear. If they can't come correct, they don't get to come at all. And that's where the shift happens. You begin to see their triggers for what they really are, not confessions, but tests, not connection, but control. You start to see the breadcrumbs, the hints, the emotional nudges as signs of their unresolved story, not yours. And that distance, that mental detachment, that emotional self-control, it becomes your sanctuary. You stop being pulled into reactive spirals. You stop analyzing every post, every lyric, every angle of their online persona. Because none of it is for healing, it's for attention, it's for relevance, it's for ego. But you've become too rich in peace to bankrupt yourself for ego games. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they're panicking. Because they sense it, they feel it, that they no longer have the emotional influence they used to, that their tricks aren't working, that their silence, their quotes, their passive reach-outs are bouncing off your calm like pebbles on steel. That scares people, because emotional control is rare, and rare things are powerful. So next time you notice the bait, breathe, smile, not because you're amused, but because you're aware. You see what's happening, and you choose not to play. You choose not to take the emotional test, because you're not here to be triggered, you're here to evolve. And sometimes the strongest flex isn't walking away, it's standing still, unshaken, unbothered, untouched, because you know now, people don't try to provoke peace, they provoke power. And your peace, it's the loudest power they've ever felt. That's why they post, that's why they prod, that's why they still try. Because you were never forgettable, you were foundational, you weren't just a partner, you were a mirror. And now that you've stopped reflecting their chaos, they're left staring into their own. Let them feel the silence. Let them fumble with their triggers. Let them watch you remain untouched, because your reaction used to be their oxygen. Now, your stillness is your sword. Let it cut through every manipulative breadcrumb. Let it silence every emotional test. Let it shield you from the weight of someone else's confusion. Because that's what Stoicism is all about. Not detachment from emotion, but detachment from manipulation. Not ignoring pain, but refusing to perform for it. You're not here to dance for digital breadcrumbs. You're not here to guess the meaning behind passive posts. You're not here to win a game you didn't ask to play. You're here to rise, to remain, to reflect, to lead. And when you do that, you're not just protecting yourself, you're redefining what emotional power really looks like. So don't respond, don't flinch, don't explain. Just keep walking, keep building, keep becoming. Because one day, they'll realize the biggest reaction they never expected was your silence. 4. They send mixed signals. There's no confusion like the kind someone creates when they don't know what they want, but they still want to keep you close. 1 minute, they're soft-spoken, warm, leaning in, liking your photo, responding to your story, maybe even sending a message that feels a little too personal for someone who moved on. And then, just like that, they vanish, cold, distant. You post something the next day and hear nothing. You feel like you imagined the connection, like you created a storyline out of scattered dots that were never meant to be connected. But here's the truth, you didn't imagine it. The connection was real, their confusion is real, but it's not your burden to carry. Mixed signals are not signs of love, they are signs of an internal tug of war. When someone is truly healed, truly clear, truly ready to move on or reconnect, their energy is consistent. They don't oscillate between wanting you and avoiding you. They don't dip in and out of your life like a wave pretending to be a tide. They show up clearly, directly, honestly. But when someone is still emotionally attached but emotionally unavailable, you get chaos. And chaos isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper followed by silence. Sometimes it's a warm emoji followed by a week of being ignored. Sometimes it's a flirtatious, hope you're doing well, followed by them disappearing into the fog again. That's not love. That's fear. That's conflict. That's ego and vulnerability clashing behind the scenes. And when you're not anchored in stoicism, you'll mistake their inconsistency for intimacy. You'll mistake a breadcrumb for a meal, but not anymore. Because now you see it for what it is, emotional instability wrapped in nostalgia. A person who's battling between the comfort of your presence and the pride of their exit. They want to know you're still there, but they don't want to give enough to deserve your response. They want the door open, but they don't want to walk in. So they knock, then run. They speak, then vanish. And you, if you're not careful, you'll start dancing with their storm. One moment, your heart races when they reach out. The next, you spiral when they go cold. That's emotional whiplash. That's not love. That's not clarity. That's not peace. And peace, real peace, is the foundation of any strong connection, especially in Stoic relationships. You can't build anything lasting on a foundation that shifts every time their fear shows up. So what do? You don't chase. You don't match their instability. You don't become a mirror to their mood swings. You stay still. You stay calm. You observe. You let their mixed signals pass through you like wind through trees. You bend, but you don't break. Because if their yes today becomes a maybe tomorrow and a no the day after that, you don't stand on that ground. You walk away from it. That's not being cold. That's being wise. And the hard truth, most people who send mixed signals aren't trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves from the rejection they fear, from the feelings they can't name, from the vulnerability they're not ready to face. But that's not your responsibility to manage. You are not a therapist for someone's emotional confusion. You are not a stand-in while they figure themselves out. You are not a backup plan, a late-night thought, or a placeholder for regret. You are a whole person. And whole people don't tolerate half energy, so when they come in soft, then pull away. Notice it. When they reactivate the thread, only to ghost again, record it. Not in bitterness, but in awareness, because a pattern isn't a coincidence. A cycle isn't a mystery. It's a choice. And the longer you stay in their loop, the more you abandon your own progress. And you've worked too hard for that. You've rebuilt yourself. You've learned to find safety in your own stillness. And now that you've learned the principles of Stoicism, you know that someone else's inconsistency is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their internal storm, and you don't need to get wet every time it rains in their emotional world. Let them figure it out. Let them decide what they want, without you having to shrink, wait, or crumble. And this is what rattles them most: your lack of response, your emotional neutrality, your decision not to play hot and cold just because they do. You're not being petty. You're being powerful, because nothing destabilizes someone who thrives on your reaction more than your silence. Your silence says, "I'm done playing." Your silence says, "I'm no longer confused." Your silence says, "I lead with calm. You can watch from a distance, send breadcrumbs, dip in and out, but I won't chase." And that calmness, that grounded energy, that stoic strength, it changes everything. Suddenly they realize you're not the same. That the version of you who used to get excited by a random message, who used to wonder what every emoji meant, who used to replay their words in your head all night, she's gone. She's been replaced by a woman who watches the weather but doesn't let it dictate her direction. That woman is you. And maybe they come back again. Maybe they send a message that seems sincere. Maybe they dip their toes back in to test your temperature, but you measure their actions by consistency, not nostalgia. You hold their effort to the light of your peace, not the shadow of your hope. And that kind of self-respect, it's magnetic, but it's also intimidating. Not everyone can meet it. Not everyone will rise to it, and that's okay, because your peace isn't dependent on their presence. You don't need to win their clarity. You need to protect your own. And here's the most powerful part of it all. When you stop responding to mixed signals, you start attracting clear ones. When you stop accepting hot and cold, you make room for people who bring warmth without conditions. You create space for relationships that are rooted in honesty, not performance. That's what Stoic relationships look like. And yes, it takes strength. It takes restraint, it takes self-control, but it's worth it. Every time you choose your peace over their inconsistency, you're building a future that doesn't bend for temporary chaos. You're becoming someone who doesn't just survive heartbreak, you transcend it. You become unshakable. So the next time their energy swings and you're tempted to match it, don't. Just watch, just breathe, just return to stillness. And if that stillness scares them, let it. If your calm shakes their chaos, let it. You're not here to manage their storm. You're here to honor your own peace. And when you do that, everything changes. You stop asking, what did I do wrong? And you start asking, is this energy worthy of me? You stop saying, why do they keep switching up? And start saying, why am I still here? And when those questions become your compass, confusion can't hold you anymore. You're free, fully, finally, unapologetically. And if that freedom feels unfamiliar, that's because you're finally stepping out of someone else's emotional trap and into your own truth. Welcome, you've arrived. Now, if you've felt this, if you've danced with hot and cold energy, if you've been yanked between hope and silence, if you're ready to lead with calm instead of chaos, like this video and comment number 1 below, so I know you're part of this journey. And if you want more of this, more clarity, more strength, more stoic power, subscribe now so you never miss a single moment of your evolution. Let's keep walking, one still, grounded step at a time. 5. They bring up shared memories. It starts subtly. Maybe they mention that road trip you took together years ago, how you both laughed over a broken GPS and ended up at a random diner that became your spot. Or maybe they say they heard a song that reminded them of you. The tone is casual, offhanded, like it just popped into their mind, but you feel it, that shift, that tug, that emotional undercurrent trying to pull you back into a moment you thought was long buried. See, when someone starts bringing up shared memories, especially ones tied to vulnerability, intimacy, or joy, they're not just making conversation. They're testing something. They're trying to access a version of you that made them feel something they haven't been able to replicate since. Nostalgia is their way of reaching back, not always for you, but for the feeling you gave them. That safety, that emotional shelter, that grounded presence they've quietly missed in the chaos of everything since. This is where people get emotionally trapped. They mistake memory for meaning. But here's where Stoicism changes the entire game. Just because someone remembers the past doesn't mean they deserve a place in your future. Just because they still carry your laughter doesn't mean they've earned your peace. They're not talking about that road trip or that slow Sunday morning just to reminisce. Consciously or not, they're trying to find out if those memories still live in you too, if they still have access, not through force, but through familiarity. It's not always malicious. Often, it's instinctual, because human beings crave emotional safety, and when they can't find it in the present, they start replaying the past. Not because the past was perfect, but because it made them feel like they belonged somewhere. You were that somewhere. And now that you've moved on, not just physically but emotionally, they're left wandering. And in that wandering, they reach for what used to hold them, you. But you are not a time machine. You are not a museum of memories for someone to tour when life gets heavy. You're a living, breathing being who has built something from your pain, and no amount of sentimental small talk erases the silence they left you in. And let's be honest, they're not bringing up memories randomly. They're choosing those memories, the ones that hit the deepest, the ones that once cracked them open, because they want to see if you still bleed where they once touched, if your heart still stirs in the spaces they used to fill. But here's the truth. If they truly let go, those memories would rest. They wouldn't need to bring them up like emotional probes. The past would stay in its place. They wouldn't revisit the moments that made them feel alive with you unless they were still trying to feel something now. But memory doesn't equal maturity. Missing you doesn't mean they've changed. Wanting the past doesn't mean they can handle your present. And this is where most people slip. They hear that memory, that moment, and think maybe they're realizing what they lost. Maybe this is their way of softening back in. But Stoic relationships require more than memories. They require mutual growth. Just because someone brings up a beautiful moment doesn't mean they're ready to build a future that matches the beauty of that memory. They're remembering how you made them feel, but they're still unprepared to protect that feeling in real time. And the old you, she would have leaned into that. She would have gotten emotional. She would have responded, hoping the memory meant more. But the new you, the grounded you don't get pulled by poetic flashbacks. You recognize the pattern. You see that this isn't a reunion, it's a reflection of their emotional landscape, of the loneliness they thought time would cure. And now that the noise has quieted, they're feeling the loss of your presence. That's why they're calling on memories, because they're realizing that no matter how far they go, certain feelings don't fade. And here's where the emotional power shift happens. You're no longer in a place where their memory of you defines your worth. You're not chasing their recognition anymore. You've outgrown the version of yourself that needed to be remembered to feel validated. You validate yourself now, and that freedom, it makes you uncatchable to anyone still chasing the past, because you're not there anymore. You've evolved. You've stepped into a version of yourself who loves from fullness, not fear, who gives from clarity, not confusion. And even though their words may sound sweet, even though hearing them recall your song or that night in the rain might flood you with warmth, you don't let it soften your boundaries. You can feel the memory without re-entering. The dynamic. You can smile without stepping back. That's what Stoicism trains you for. Not emotional numbness, but emotional discipline. You feel deeply, but you choose wisely. You remember, but you don't regress. Because here's what they forget. That version of you who made those memories, she's not waiting anymore. She's walking, she's building, she's thriving. And if they want access to this you, it's going to take more than nostalgia. It's going to take presence. It's going to take action. And if they're not offering that, if all they can give is another replay of "remember when," then your job is to listen and let it go. You're not cold for doing so. You're clear. You're protecting the peace you fought to build. You're honoring the boundaries that your growth created. Because the truth is, when someone brings up the past, they're often hoping you'll open the door to it, but you're not there anymore. You're not entertaining recycled emotions that once left you starving. You don't need to relive moments that are no longer aligned with your present values. You've moved from sentiment to sovereignty, and that shift is powerful. That shift is what makes you immune to emotional breadcrumbs. So yes, they'll probably say something else. Another memory, another laugh, another soft reference to the way things used to be. And you'll notice it, you'll feel it. You might even allow a small smile, but you won't lean back in. You won't confuse memory for movement, because your life is forward now. And when they realize that, when they see that their references to old times no longer reopen the door, they'll have to face a truth they've avoided, that the past isn't coming back, that what they want can't be resurrected with words, that you're not a page they can reread, you're a whole story they chose to stop writing, and that story kept going without them. Let them remember, let them revisit. But don't you dare regress. Don't water yourself down just to relive a feeling that no longer fits who you are. That's not growth. That's grief in disguise. And you've already grieved, you've already healed, you've already stepped into the light. You're not here to rehearse the same chapter. You're here to write a new one, with someone who doesn't just cherish the past, but commits to the present. That's the kind of love your evolution deserves. That's the standard now. And no matter how sweet the memory sounds, if it's not paired with action, it's just an echo. And echoes don't build futures, you do. 6. They subtly compare others to you. You hear it in the way they talk. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's just one sentence. She's nice, but she doesn't really get my humor the way you did. Other times it slips through in between thoughts, like a whisper trying to pretend it doesn't want to be heard. You always made things feel calm. I don't know how, but you did. And right there, without directly saying it, they say everything. They compare, they measure, they stack the present against the past. And you're the ruler. You've become the standard they can't seem to forget. And no matter how far they go, how many people they meet, or how much they try to convince themselves they've moved, when you're still there, quietly but powerfully living in the gaps between their connections. It's not about ego. It's not about pride. It's about imprint. You left something behind that can't be replaced because it wasn't performative. It wasn't transactional. It was real, deep, safe, present. And that kind of presence doesn't just disappear. They don't always realize they're doing it. They might not even be aware of how often your name surfaces in their head when they're sitting across from someone new. But that's how emotional impact works. It doesn't ask for permission, it echoes. And that echo becomes a lens. They start to see everything through it. The way this new person doesn't laugh as freely, the way their conversations feel just a little more forced, the way they feel a little less seen. And that's when it hits them. You weren't just someone. You were the calm in their chaos, the clarity in their fog, the grounding they didn't know they needed until it was gone. And now they're reaching, searching, comparing, trying to find that feeling again. But the thing about Stoic relationships is that when they're done right, they're unforgettable. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're deeply intentional. You were intentional, and they've been trying to fill your absence with noise, with distraction, with people who might check some boxes but don't touch their spirit. And that's where the comparison begins, quietly, consistently, unintentionally, and painfully. Because the truth is, they thought they could replace you, that it would be simple, that love and connection were copy and paste experiences. But what they're learning now is that energy like yours doesn't just show up. You don't replicate emotional safety. You don't manufacture trust. You don't mimic presence. And so, as they sit across from someone new, someone who may look good on paper, they feel the absence of what you brought. Not just the moments, but the meaning. Not just the laughs, but the space between them. And when they speak, it slips, sometimes in praise of you, sometimes in frustration with someone else, sometimes in silence that speaks louder than any sentence could. But they compare, and that comparison, that's the sign, that's the indicator. That even if you're no longer part of their daily life, you're still alive in their emotional memory, that you were not temporary. You were transformative. And here's the part they don't realize. Comparison is not closure. It's proof. They're still entangled in something unfinished, something unprocessed. And yet, you must remember, just because someone compares others to you doesn't mean they're ready for you. Just because they finally see your value doesn't mean they're capable of honoring it. Recognition is not readiness. Nostalgia is not growth. And memory is not movement. You don't get drawn back into a dynamic simply because someone finally realized what you were. That's not love. That's late awareness. And you're not a lesson to relearn. You're a life they didn't know how to hold. And now that they've seen the contrast, it stings. Not because they hate the present, but because the past was warmer than they realized. But you're not here to be someone's better than now. You're not here to be someone's quiet standard while they build with someone else. That's emotional limbo, and you've outgrown it. You don't exist to be revisited when life disappoints. You're not a backup plan. You're not a benchmark for people to use as they settle for less. You're a sovereign being, and your energy, it's sacred, it's intentional, it's whole. And if someone couldn't see that when they had it, it's not your job to reopen the door just because they're suddenly awake. Their realization doesn't entitle them to a revival. Let them compare, let them notice, let them sit with the fact that they found other people, but not another you. That's not bitterness, that's clarity, that's the gift of stoicism. You observe, but you don't engage. You witness, but you don't waver. You hear the comparisons, but you don't shrink for them. You don't say, maybe this means something. You say, it's about time they saw the truth, but I'm no longer there to explain it. Because you don't prove your value twice. You don't keep showing up to be understood. You showed up the first time with your full heart, your full presence, your full energy, and that was enough. If they missed it, that's their burden now, not yours. And this is the hard truth you must hold. You can still matter deeply to someone and still not belong in their story. You can still be the most impactful connection they ever had and still be the one who walks away, because love without growth is a dead end. And you don't turn back down paths that led to nowhere just because someone finally noticed the scenery. You're building new paths, ones that don't require you to compete with your old self, ones that don't demand you be the one who got away, because you didn't get away. You evolved. And now, every quiet comparison they make is just a mirror reflecting their emotional lag. They're still catching up to the value you already knew you had. And while they try to explain why others just aren't like you, you're no longer available to be proof. You're too busy living, too busy growing, too busy aligning with people who don't need to lose you to appreciate you. That's what Stoic relationships do. They teach you to love without attachment, to let go without resentment, and to stand still in the face of comparison, knowing you are the standard. So when you hear it, directly or indirectly, don't flinch, don't fantasize, don't fall back. You know what it means, and you know what it doesn't. Their recognition is not your reason to return. Their awareness is not your answer. It's their echo of a love they didn't know how to keep. And now that the noise has quieted, your silence is the loudest thing they hear. So hold that silence, honor that distance, protect that peace. Because you, my friend, were never average. You were the calm in the storm. You were the clarity in the chaos. And now, you are the one they measure everything else against. Not because you tried to be, but because you couldn't help but leave a mark. That's the kind of impact Stoic energy leaves. Quiet, strong, unshakable. So if you've ever heard those subtle comparisons, if you felt the quiet longing behind someone's words, if you've been measured against but never replaced, like this video and comment #1 below, so I know you understand what that power really feels like. And if you're done being compared and ready to be chosen fully, clearly, and completely, subscribe now and stay with me. Because we're not just letting go of the past. We're building something greater than nostalgia. We're building a life that never needs to be explained. If you've read this far, you already know. Emotional attachment doesn't always scream. It whispers. It lingers in the silence. It shows up in ways the world doesn't always teach you to notice. But now you do. You've seen how attachment hides in reactions, in quiet observations, in digital stalking dressed up as detachment. You've felt how it tries to trigger you, how it shows up wrapped in nostalgia, and how it desperately tries to compare what's present with what's gone. But the truth is, none of that matters more than the power you've reclaimed, because this isn't just about them still being attached to you, it's about you no longer being available for what once broke you. This is about you choosing clarity over chaos, choosing stillness over reaction, choosing peace over performance. And that's what Stoic relationships are really about. Not the absence of feeling, but the discipline to not be ruled by it. The ability to love with openness, but not abandon your boundaries. The strength to witness someone's emotional confusion and still protect your clarity. So let them react, let them watch, let them remember, let them compare. You don't need to flinch anymore. You don't need to interpret silence like it holds your worth, because now your stillness speaks louder than any message ever could. You've grown into someone who doesn't chase chaos, who doesn't explain her peace, and who doesn't give energy to echoes. You are the contrast, the calm they never saw coming, and that calm, that's your legacy. That's the standard. That's the story you keep writing, one unshaken breath at a time.